Right, hi guys, and welcome back to another video on Bluebeam. Right, so my previous video actually covered on some of the settings under your preferences. So today will be part 2 of the settings and preferences. So as mentioned, preferences are found at the top left hand corner of your menu bar at the top left. So under preferences. Alright, so in the previous session we mentioned about user already, so let's talk about the rest. Right, so the first thing that you will usually change is whether you prefer a light or a dark theme. Right, so it really depends on your preference. For me, I have done my drafting work in AutoCAD before, and I always prefer the dark menu. This is actually the light menu, right? So personally, I always prefer the dark one, so I will always switch back to the dark, right? So that's your preference. The next thing is that this show full screen crosshair, right? So there in the course of my trainings, there are really many people who ask about this full screen crosshair. So let's take a look what the crosshair is. When you move your mouse around on the screen on any document, okay, you will notice that the crosshair will, let's say for example, if I start off with, for example, looking at this, right, my crosshair goes across the full screen, meaning the lines, right, actually covers the entire screen. So this actually helps me for me to select the items that I want to know very clearly. So even if I move the cursor to a location where I can't see very clearly, the extended lines actually allow me to tell where my cursor is, so you will never lose your cursor, right? So that also helps me when I try to measure or I draw lines that can allow me to know whether it's following a straight line or so on and so forth, right? So that is for your full screen crosshair, so that is highly recommended. Right, okay, so let's move on to the next one, grid and snap. Right, so by default there are certain different grid and snap content as well. You can decide which ones you would like to use. In certain cases you may want to snap to midpoints, in certain cases you may not want to, right? So this is really for you to choose from there. Right, the next one, let's move on to tools. Right, so there are two I want to mention about. One is your reuse tools and the other is your auto size text box. Right, so in terms of reuse tools, this button over here is actually the same as clicking on tools and reuse. Right, so by default this reuse tools button does not appear, that means it is not active. Okay, so the reuse button is that if I choose to turn it off and I try to use it, right, so whenever you place certain items, whether for measurements or whether for markups, it will just be placed once, right? But if I turn on the reuse button, Bluebeam will assume that you're trying to put in multiple times. So this is especially useful when you have multiple instances of an item that you want to place, or multiple instances of a measurement that you want to continue measure over and over again. Like for example, where there are multiple rooms of the same type, then this reuse tool will come in very handy. Right, the other one which I want to talk about is the auto size text box. Now anybody who has created a text box before, I'm sure you know, when I draw a text box, most of the time you usually draw a text box that is larger than whatever you want to type in. So for example, if I create a box of that size and I say to be demolished as soon as approval is given, right, so you can see from a glance that it's too big, right, it's way too big. So when I finish, you also notice that it automatically adjusts the size. It is not my original size. So that is what the auto size text box brings to the table. Okay, so if I turn it off, which is by default like that, and I do my text box here, okay, a larger space. So if I just say please revise, right, my box size actually expands to the entire shape here, right? So if you are someone who creates text box very often and call outs, it will be highly recommended for you to turn this option on from there. Right, okay, let's move on to the next one under studio. Okay, so under studio, I find this function very useful, the enable flashing effect on studio alerts. So those who have used studio before, you know that whenever you are in your discussion, right, there may be people who ping you, there may be people who assign responsibilities to you, right? So when that happens, under these three areas here, record, notifications, or pending, there will usually be an orange flash. So it's almost like a notification that only once you click on it and you check what the notification is, then the flashing will subside. Right? So that is obviously recommended because you don't want to miss out on any of these any of the items that they are asking you for. Right? Okay, so the next one we try to move on. Let's move on to admin. Okay, so let's move on to window first. Right, the one of the text functions that we recommend here, this is on a case-to-case basis, that you may want to look at enable text highlighting. So what does enable text highlighting mean? Right, so let me give you one example. Right, okay, so the example is this. So whenever you use the highlighting function, okay, so let's show you a before and after. So right now the option is actually selected. If I were to highlight this item over here, okay, TD1112 painting and decorating, if I check my comments bar, right, it actually shows me exactly what I highlighted. Right, so this is what that feature brings to the table. Now if I actually turn that option off, okay, and now let's try something different. If I highlight something like, say, scope of works, you notice it doesn't show anything. Okay, so that's why it's recommended to keep this option on, so that whenever you are highlighting certain wordings, it will appear under comments as well. So that will help you to have an idea of what exactly you're highlighting, because under your label and under your subject, you may not know what are the exact content of the items that you're highlighting at the moment. Right, okay, now let's move on to admin. Alright, so under admin, for those who are new to the software, right, when you open Bluebeam, they will usually ask you a question: would you like to set Bluebeam as your default PDF opener? Right, for all means and purposes, it is recommended that since you have Bluebeam, you should be setting Bluebeam as your default program. Right, so a few last ones is under settings. Right, so settings are useful because for those who have created your profiles, your stamps, your tool chests, right, you always encounter an issue when you want to move computers, or maybe your computer crashes, you want to move to a new PC. Right, so the backup function over here will help you that once you click on that button, it will actually store all your backup into one, or store all your settings into one backup file, a zip file. So once you have that, you can actually bring it to the new computer and then just click restore, go back to the same zip file which you backed up just now, and then it will restore everything in. Right, so one thing to take note as well, for those who are familiar with all these backup settings, your stamps is actually located in a separate folder. Meaning settings such as profiles, tool chests, they are all under the same area. We'll show that later. But stamps is actually in a folder of its own. So for those who are trying to locate the folder where their stamps are, they are at a separate location altogether. Right, for those who are looking at where the other locations are, let's say for profiles, they are under this folder. Right, so this folder is also where you will find your tool chests as well. Right, so I hope all these settings and all the generic settings in the preferences will help you out in your usage of Bluebeam. Right, thank you. See you again.